Have you ever shivered through a night on the trail, or maybe sweated until dawn? Sweated. Or maybe you have a child who's going on a school hiking trip and you need to buy them a sleeping bag, and you don't go hiking, you have no idea what to get, and you're looking at all this stuff and you're like, what sleeping bag do I buy them?
What do I do? Help me! Help me!
Choosing the wrong sleeping bag can turn a lovely adventure into a struggle for comfort. Stay tuned as we dive into how to select the perfect sleeping bag for yours or for your loved one's next hiking trip. We're going to ensure you get a good night's sleep no matter where you camp. Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel, and if you're new here, I'm Mauser, and with over 30 years hiking experience both as an experienced guide and a hiking enthusiast, I help you gear up and get out into the wilderness with a bit of confidence. And today we are tackling a crucial bit of gear, the sleeping bag. Get this gear choice right and you are in for cozy nights under the stars. Get it wrong and well, not so good. Let's get into it. Let's get straight in and let's help you find a good sleeping bag.
That would be incredible. Thank you so much.
So I've had a lot of people asking me, messaging me lately, asking what sort of sleeping bag should they purchase. And a lot of these questions are coming from parents, family, asking what sort of sleeping bag should they purchase for their teenage children who are heading out onto winter trips and camps through school and the like. So this is a pretty important decision. A sleeping bag can last you a lifetime, literally. When purchasing a sleeping bag, especially for a specific activity like winter bushwalking here in Tasmania where I live in Australia, it's crucial to consider several factors to ensure comfort, safety and practicality. Here we're going to dive into 4 key aspects: temperature rating, weight, insulation type, as well as the shape and fit of the sleeping bag. And this is all going to give you a comprehensive guide tailored to someone new to the world of sleeping bags. And if you've been in the game a while, hopefully you will learn a thing or two as well.
Ah, sweet!
First up, temperature rating. Temperature rating. So the temperature rating is a make or break feature of any sleeping bag. It is probably the main thing you think about when you are deciding on purchasing a sleeping bag. And it can be a bit overwhelming when you're looking through all the different sleeping bags available both online and in store, which one you should get and which temperature rating. You'll find bags rated with high positive numbers for warm weather through to big negative numbers for winter extremes. But one thing I have learnt over the years is that it is always better to err on the side of a warmer sleeping bag, one that is rated to colder temperatures, rather than get a sleeping bag that isn't rated to as warm a temperature. That way, with a warmer bag, you can unzip it if you're hot and let a bit of airflow in, but you cannot add warmth to a cooler sleeping bag, really. It's a bit harder to do. Now, for most 3-season hikers, a bag rated anywhere between sort of 0 degrees Celsius and -5 degrees Celsius, or if you're a cold sleeper, even out to sort of -8 or -10 if you must, those sort of ratings should do the trick. I'm generally a 0 to sort of -6 degrees Celsius sort of guy for a 3-season bag, but it is certainly something you should consider when making a decision. Now, it's all very well for companies to say, well, this sleeping bag is rated to this temperature, but how can you be sure that this is regulated, and what is involved for these companies giving a sleeping bag a temperature rating? So we're just going to spend a couple of minutes here and go into what is involved in giving a sleeping bag a temperature rating. Now, the process for determining temperature ratings for sleeping bags involves a combination of international standards, sophisticated equipment, and thermal mannequins. This process is crucial for providing consumers with reliable information on the thermal performance of sleeping bags, allowing for informed decisions based on standardized testing rather than subjective claims. Let's dive into the specifics of how these tests are conducted, and we'll have a look at the role of these thermal mannequins and standards such as EN 13537 and ISO 23537-1:2022. Thermal mannequins in sleeping bag testing. So what I have learned in my research for this video is that thermal mannequins are central to the testing process for sleeping bag temperature ratings.
Hello.
Now put your hand up if you knew that. And I've been hiking for 30 years. I actually didn't really know that. Haven't really looked into it before, but it's quite interesting.
That's interesting.
These mannequins are essentially life-sized, human-shaped dummies. I guess like something you would see in a clothing shop. They are equipped with internal heating elements and numerous temperature sensors distributed across the surface of the mannequin. They simulate the body's heat production and distribution patterns, and they provide a very standardized method to assess the thermal insulation of sleeping bags. The mannequins used in sleeping bag testing, such as Simon, seen here, typically represent a 50th percentile Western male body form. And what this does using this same sort of mannequin, it ensures consistency across testing. The mannequins are equipped with ultra-stable resistance wire heating, if that means anything to you.
I didn't understand a one word you said.
But what that means is that they're able to generate a uniform amount of heat like a human body would. And the heat sensors embedded in the mannequin measure the amount of heat required to maintain a constant body temperature under various conditions. In terms of the actual testing standards themselves, these are the ones you will see on a sleeping bag when you go to purchase it, or hopefully you will see it when you go to purchase it, but it's normally represented by something like this. And for example, this one has got the EN 13537 standard. That was a standard introduced in the early 2000s, and it was the first widely used standard for measuring sleeping bag temperature ratings, and it specified the calculation of 3 main temperature ratings. And you can see that on this label here, you've got comfort, lower limit, and extreme. So that is conforming to the EN 13537 standard, and according to this has a comfort rating of -4 degrees. Sleeping bag I bought my wife recently. More recently, you have another standard called the ISO, that's called the International Standards Organization. EN means European, but the ISO 23537-1:2022 is an updated ISO standard, and that is an international standard that specifies requirements and test methods for labeling adult-sized sleeping bags. And basically, it's just building upon and refining the procedures established by the EN 13537 standard, aiming for more precise and globally consistent temperature ratings all around the world, not just within Europe. And how do they do the actual test? Well, thanks for asking. And look, if you find this boring, just skip ahead. Chapter markers are down below, but I think this is, it's relevant. If you're designing a sleeping bag, you should know how they're testing them and all that sort of stuff. But how do they test them? Well, let's have a look. Firstly, the thermal mannequin is dressed in standardized clothing. So it's a thin thermal top, some long johns, and some socks. It's then put inside the sleeping bag. That is then put on an insulated sleeping pad and put in a climate controlled chamber. The mannequin's heating system is then activated to simulate body warmth. Sensors monitor the energy required to maintain the mannequin's temperature, and that provides information on the sleeping bag's insulation effectiveness. The data collected from these mannequin tests are then used to calculate the comfort, the lower limit, and the extreme limit temperature ratings. And these ratings, which we look at when we're purchasing a bag, offer a guide to the conditions in which the sleeping bag will keep the user warm. So what are these ratings that I just spoke of?
What?
Well, they're classified into actual several tiers, but the main ones that all the manufacturers put on the bags, there are 3. And these are the comfort, the lower limit, and the extreme. So the main one I tend to look at is the comfort rating. And what is that, you ask? How is that graded? They describe this as a temperature at which an average woman can sleep comfortably in a relaxed position. And for men, this rating indicates a slightly warmer comfort level, meaning that men will probably find the bag comfortable at slightly lower temperatures. The lower limit rating that you see, which on this bag, lower limit is -10 degrees or 14 degrees Fahrenheit. This is the lowest temperature at which an average man can sleep for 8 hours in a curled position without waking. And if you're a warm sleeper, you can use this rating to decide the minimum temperature at which the sleeping bag may still provide an adequate warmth. And finally, the extreme rating, which on this one is -29 degrees Celsius or -20 degrees Fahrenheit, the extreme rating. This rating is a survival only indicator for an average woman. It marks the temperature range between the lower limit and extreme where there is a risk of health damage due to hypothermia. This should only be considered for emergency situations, not regular use. It's something really that doesn't even come in consideration when I'm purchasing a sleeping bag. I'm looking at those first 2 more than anything. In a pinch, I know if for some reason I was out on a walk where it normally wouldn't get below -5 degrees Celsius, -6 degrees, I know that if all of a sudden there was a cold snap and it went to -30, I might be okay, maybe. But it's something I generally don't use as a guide. I use the comfort and the lower limit ratings. So that is the ratings, but then you may ask, well, why are there still EN ratings, ISO ratings, that sort of thing?
Why? Why?
Well, in the end, it basically, some companies that, like that one is there, has got the EN rating, not the most recent ISO rating, but the EN one has been around for a long time. It's got a lot of kudos to it, and I guess some companies are still using it because of consumer confidence in that rating system when they see the EN 13537. If you've been around the game for a while, like myself, you've probably seen that. It's sort of in your head, kind of. You can just roll it off the tongue, but it's probably due to confidence from the consumer in that rating system. Really doesn't make a difference. They're both similar standards. So what do these ratings, these temperature ratings, mean for you? Well, don't take them as gospel. I never take them as gospel. I take them as a guide. And generally, when I am buying a sleeping bag, if I am looking for something that for a 3-season bag, like I said, I'm looking for something around -5, -6 degrees Celsius. I'll generally take it a notch further down to -6 or so, just so I've got that extra coverage. I know I can zip it open if I'm getting too hot, but it's going to give me coverage when the temperature does drop on those sort of shoulder seasons. It's going to keep me warmer. So I always err on the side of a warmer bag. The other thing you can do is get a warm sleeping bag liner as well. And I do have those for use with my summer sleeping bags. Things like the Reactor sleeping bag liners, they're a good option to use if you just wanted a 2-season or a summer bag. You can get these fleece Reactor sleeping bag liners, which will add sort of 5 degrees temperature warmth to the bag. And of course, these bags, the temperature ratings can be affected by things like your sleeping pad, the clothes you're wearing, you know, how exhausted you are, your metabolism, all that sort of stuff can come into play when you are sleeping in a sleeping bag. So you've got to take that into consideration. Are you a warm sleeper? Are you a cold sleeper? You need to know that sort of stuff. But as a general rule, when my family are asking me for their, you know, their 16, 17-year-old kids who are going on a winter camp, I've sort of advised to get around a -5, -6 degree sleeping bag for here in Tasmania. They're going to be in huts. They're going to be having, you know, good clothing, that sort of stuff. They can layer up if they need to, but that will last them a long time and it will give them a good sleeping bag for use all year round. But having said that, the temperature rating isn't the only thing I consider when I'm purchasing a sleeping bag. There are a few other factors as well. Secondly, the weight. Sleeping bag weight. Now, the weight of the sleeping bag is probably my second most critical piece of data I want when I'm deciding on a sleeping bag. The other bit of information I need when I'm deciding on a sleeping bag, particularly for when I'm going out on trips for, you know, 8, 9, 10 days at a time. It's going to be cold, but I want a warm sleeping bag, but I don't want it weighing my pack down a lot. And like I've said in the past, I'm a quilt guy these days. I do use a lot of quilts these days. Well, not a lot of quilts, I've got one quilt, but I use a quilt these days, but I do have a lot of sleeping bags. You know, this is a sleeping bag video, it's not a quilt video. So, yeah, it's okay. So obviously, the lighter the sleeping bag is, the better, but you still want it to provide that same level of warmth. Now, typically down-filled sleeping bags, they're the ones with the feathers inside. They're going to be lighter than a synthetic sleeping bag, which has a synthetic fiber inside. And you can easily tell a down sleeping bag, normally they're the fluffy ones. You know, they're loft, they're like, you know, a puffy jacket. Take, for example, this one, nice fluffy down sleeping bag. I love a down sleeping bag. You may go for a synthetic sleeping bag if it's going to be potentially wet, but I've always preferred down. The down these days is fantastic, and it's my preferred option. It's lighter, and it's a great insulator. And they've got a great warmth to weight ratio, making them great for hiking, especially here in Tasmania in Australia. Now, speaking of down and synthetic, that is obviously the other key factor I am considering when purchasing a sleeping bag. Insulation type. So as I alluded to, the insulation type will determine how well the sleeping bag performs in various conditions while you're out hiking, particularly in terms of warmth and resistance to moisture. So you've got the down, which is the feathers, and down, this stuff, like this fluffy stuff in this bag, is renowned for its warmth to weight ratio, as well as its compressibility. You can pack it right down, quite small, and this is a huge advantage when space is at a premium in your hiking pack. However, it has one pitfall, and that is when it gets wet, it loses its insulation properties. But these days, there are a lot of improvements in down. There's water resistant down, hydrophobic down, all that sort of thing. It is getting better and becoming a better option pretty much in most conditions. In addition to that, you've got sleeping bags these days with waterproof linings, water resistant linings, that sort of thing as well. Your other option is a synthetic sleeping bag, and synthetic sleeping bags are generally heavier and less compressible than down, but they absolutely excel in wet conditions. The wet does not affect them. They retain warmth even when wet and dry faster than down as well. And they are typically less expensive and easier to maintain, and could be a good option for those just doing the casual outdoor adventure, those new to outdoor adventures. I know that my kids, they're ones that we just take camping in the car and stuff. They're synthetic sleeping bags just because I can pack them away and they're easy to maintain. The other factor you probably need to consider also is the shape and the fit of the sleeping bag. The shape and fit of the sleeping bag can greatly influence its effectiveness at keeping you warm and its overall comfort level. So there's a couple of different shapes you can get in a sleeping bag. There is the mummy shape, and that sort of is self-explanatory. It's shaped like a Egyptian mummy would be. The design is tapered at the feet and wider at the shoulders, and it creates a close sort of fit around the body. And what this does is it reduces the internal airspace, so there's not as much air within the sleeping bag to heat, and this is generally the favoured option for people like myself, where we're wanting to save on weight, but we want to be as warm as possible. It's ideal for those cold conditions that we get here in Tasmania in winter. However, some people might find that snug fit a bit restrictive, a bit uncomfortable, so it's important to sort of consider that. Even try one out if you can before you buy. Your other option is a rectangular or a semi-rectangular sleeping bag, and these bags offer more room inside, and that can be more comfortable for people who move around a bit in their sleep. And they're generally not as warm as a mummy sleeping bag because there's more air in there, it takes longer to heat, it's harder to maintain the heat in there because of the air. But they are generally a bit more versatile and they're fine for mild conditions. And one like this one that I bought for my wife is a Sea to Summit Altitude AT1. And I wouldn't call that a mummy bag, I would call that a semi-rectangular, I guess. And that's going to give that sort of comfort level. I think it's a nicer bag for the conditions we're using it for, with the comfort level of -4 degrees, 3-season bag, quite a nice option. And when purchasing a sleeping bag, it's essential to consider not just the bag itself, but also how it integrates with other elements of your sleep system. These elements include your sleeping pad, the clothing you wear to bed, things like thermals, and the type of shelter you use. Are you in a tent? Are you in a hut? Are you sleeping under the stars? Each of these factors plays a crucial role in determining your overall comfort and warmth during the night when you're hiking, and I've made heaps of videos on that stuff. There's sleeping pad ones, there's clothing ones. Check out all the links below, subscribe to the channel, do that stuff. See you on the next one.